pay for giving my husband everything in the divorce except our son? When his lawyer leaned in and whispered 5 words, just 5. And Bradley's face, that smug, self-satisfied face I had stared at across the breakfast table for 15 years, turned completely ashen. His hands started to shake. The papers he had been so eager to sign trembled like leaves in a storm. And I, for the first time in 3 years, smiled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning because you need to understand how we got here. How a woman everyone thought had lost her mind was actually playing the longest, most patient game of her life. My name is Monica Keene. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 months ago, I was married to Bradley Keene. 15 years of marriage. That's longer than most Hollywood relationships, longer than some small countries have existed, and definitely longer than ours should have lasted. My patience, but I am a stubborn woman. I get it from my grandmother. I met Bradley when I was 17. I graduated high school early, not because I was a genius, but because I was practical and driven and really wanted to get out of my parents' house. I got a job at the Henderson and Price law firm as a file clerk. Minimum wage, maximum paper cuts, but it was mine. By 18, I had worked my way up to a paralegal position. I was good with details, good with numbers, good at keeping my mouth shut and my eyes open. Bradley was 24 when we met at a client event, charming, ambitious, full of dreams of building a real estate empire. He talked about the future like it was already his, like success was just waiting for him to show up and claim it. He said he was going to build something incredible. I said I'd help him file the paperwork. Romance, right? We were married when I was 19. Owen arrived when I was 20. I kept working at the law firm part-time while raising our son, building up my 401k and saving every spare dollar I could. My grandmother always said a woman should have her own money. Not secret money, she would clarify. Just her own, something no one can take. When I was 23, Bradley's business finally took off. He asked me to leave the law firm and help him full-time. He needed someone to handle the books, deal with clients, coordinate with contractors, someone he could trust completely. I became his unpaid everything. Accountant, office manager, client liaison, model home interior decorator, marketing coordinator, event planner. I did it all while raising Owen, managing our household, and somehow keeping everyone fed and reasonably happy. My official title was wife. My unofficial title was everything else. For 11 years, I poured myself into building Bradley's dream. And for 11 years he got the credit, the awards, the recognition. At every industry event, I was Bradley's wife. At every celebration he thanked his team, his mentors, his vision, but somehow never got around to thanking me. Somewhere along the way things changed. He started making decisions without consulting me. He started staying out for work later and later. He started criticizing little things. The way I dressed, the meals I cooked, my lack of ambition. Lack of ambition. I was running his entire back office for free while raising his son and keeping his life organized. But sure, not ambitious enough. Then, 3 months ago, he dropped the bomb. He came home on a Tuesday night. I was making dinner, his favorite actually, because apparently I'm a glutton for unappreciated effort. He sat me down at the kitchen table with this look on his face. Not sad, not apologetic, just businesslike. I want a divorce, he said. And I want the house, the cars, the business, everything. You can have Owen. He said it like he was ordering off a menu. I'll have the assets. You hold the kid. Thanks. Just like that, our 15-year-old son was leftover pizza, a nuisance he was graciously allowing me to keep. I just stared at him. 15 years of marriage. And this was how it ended, at our kitchen table between the salt shaker and the butter dish, as if I were just another object he was discarding. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't find out until later, was that Bradley had been planning this for months. He already had a lawyer, Gregory Stanton, expensive and experienced. He had been mapping out his exit strategy while I was making his meals and scheduling his dental appointments. The man I trusted with everything had completely blindsided me. The next day, his mother showed up. In walked Phyllis Keene, a woman who had treated me like her hired help for 15 years. With her perfectly coiffed hair and her perfectly practiced face of sympathy. She patted my hand and told me I should have tried harder to keep him happy. Men have needs, dear, she said, as if she were explaining something complicated to a slow child. Phyllis's advice on marriage was always fascinating, considering her husband spent 7 days a week at the golf course specifically to avoid being in the same room with her. But sure, I was the problem. That first week was a blur. Bradley moved me into the guest room. He had documents drafted, agreements proposed, and deadlines set. Everything was moving so fast I felt like I was drowning. Everyone saw a woman whose world had just collapsed, a wife abandoned after 15 years, a victim who didn't see it coming. But here's the thing. What Bradley didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had found something 3 years ago. Something buried in his own financial records, something he thought was hidden forever. And I had been quietly, patiently preparing ever since. Back to the disaster. A week after the announcement, Bradley had taken full control. The guest room became my permanent residence in what used to be our home. My closet was downsized from a walk-in to 2 small sections he graciously allowed me to keep. The message was clear. This is not your home anymore. Within 2 weeks he started moving her in. Kendra Walsh, 27, worked at his company. Of course she did. She had that perfect Instagram look, blonde highlights, flawless nails, and yoga pants that cost more than my weekly groceries. She walked into my kitchen like she owned it. She put on my apron, my grandmother's apron, while she made smoothies in my blender. She was younger than my marriage, younger than my favorite handbag, but she made incredible smoothies, so I guess that's something. Bradley paraded her around like a trophy. They would sit on my couch, watch my television, and eat off my plates. He would wrap his arm around her right in front of me, as if I were a piece of furniture, as if I were already gone. The humiliation escalated daily. First, he canceled my personal credit card. "We need to separate finances," he said, as if he were being reasonable. Then the joint card. Then he suggested I should probably find another place to stay while we sorted things out. My own home, and I was being asked to leave. Phyllis came over to help me pack, and by help, I mean she went through my belongings and decided what I deserved to keep. Old clothes, fine. Family photos, some of them. My grandmother's recipe box. She hesitated on that one, as if considering claiming it for herself. Anything I wasn't allowed to take? Any jewelry Bradley had bought me over 15 years, any furniture I had picked out, anything of value. Those are marital assets, Phyllis explained, and Bradley is entitled to them. She packed my things in trash bags, not boxes, trash bags, as if I was garbage being taken out. Through all of this, there was one person I thought I could trust, Marissa Lang. We'd been friends for 20 years, since high school, through boyfriends and breakups and babies and everything in between. She was the first person I called after Bradley's announcement. She was so supportive, always checking in, always asking how I was, always ready to listen. She would come over with wine and let me cry on her shoulder. She told me I deserved better. She told me Bradley was making a huge mistake. But something felt off. Small things at first. Bradley seemed to know my plans before I made them. When I mentioned to Marissa that I was thinking about fighting for the house, Gregory called the next day with a counteroffer. When I told Marissa I was looking at apartments in a specific neighborhood, Bradley made a comment about that exact area being too expensive for me. Then it clicked. Looking back, I should have seen it years ago. The way Marissa always lit up when Bradley entered a room. The way she complimented him a little too much, laughed a little too hard at his jokes. She always asked about him first when we talked. How is Bradley? How is the business? Is Bradley happy? She had been in love with my husband for 15 years. And Bradley, because he collected admirers like some people collect stamps, knew exactly how to use it. He made her feel special, important. Not like other women. He probably hinted that they'd get together after the divorce. He gave her just enough hope to keep her loyal. My best friend was his spy. 20 years of friendship, sold for some light flirting and empty promises. You should have charged more, Marissa. But the worst part wasn't Bradley. It wasn't Phyllis, it wasn't even Marissa. The worst part was Owen. My son saw everything. The girlfriend, the grandmother packing my bags, the way his father looked at me like I was nothing. And Bradley was working on him, dripping poison in his ear day after day. Your mom is making this difficult. I just want everyone to be happy. She's the one dragging this out. I'm trying to be fair, but she won't cooperate. Owen started pulling away from me. Not angry exactly, just distant, confused. He didn't know who to believe. His father was very convincing. I could lose the house, I could lose the money, I could lose everything I had built for 15 years. But watching my son look at me like I was the problem, that was the knife. That was the wound that really bled. I hired a lawyer. Talia Russo, recommended by my old firm. 52, sharp as a razor, with zero tolerance for nonsense. She reviewed my situation and laid out the battle plan. You helped build this business, she said. You're entitled to half of everything. The house, the company, the accounts. We fight. I looked at her for a long time. What if I don't want to fight? Talia looked at me like I had started speaking another language, like I'd suggested we send Bradley a thank you card and a fruit basket. She thought I was broken, depressed, too defeated to stand up for myself. She had no idea. I moved into a small apartment with Owen, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. A kitchen the size of my old pantry. Half our boxes didn't even fit. They were stacked in the corner of Owen's room, a monument to how far we had fallen. Meanwhile, Bradley was posting pictures with Kendra. New chapter. New energy. Blessed, he wrote. Phyllis commented underneath. So happy for you, honey. You deserve joy. My sister called furious. You need a shark of a lawyer. Take him for everything he's worth. Everyone had advice. Everyone thought they knew what I should do. Everyone saw a woman who had given up, who couldn't fight, who was letting her husband walk all over her. Everyone was wrong. Here's the thing about being underestimated. People stop watching you, they stop being careful around you, they stop guarding their secrets. And that's exactly when you learn everything you need to know. 3 years. That's how long I had been carrying this secret. That's how long I had known the truth about Bradley Keene and his brilliant, glamorous, and completely fake empire. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday night, 3 years before the divorce. Bradley was working late again. He was working late a lot by then, though I didn't yet know what that really meant. I was going through the company books, reconciling accounts, doing the unglamorous work that kept his business running, and I found something strange. A wire transferred to an account I didn't recognize. Then another, then a pattern. Money flowing out of our accounts and into places I had never seen before. I dug deeper. I stayed up until 3 in the morning following the trail. What I found made my blood run cold. Bradley had been borrowing against everything we owned. The house, our beautiful house everyone admired, had 3 mortgages on it. The original $400,000 loan, a second mortgage for $350,000 taken out 4 years ago, and a third mortgage for another $350,000 taken out 2 years ago. A total of $1,100,000 was owed. The house's current value? $850,000. We were underwater by $250,000 on a house I thought was entirely ours. The business was even worse. Lines of credit maxed out at $200,000. Back taxes owed for $85,000. Debts to suppliers for $120,000. Equipment loans for $75,000. The company Bradley bragged about at every party, the company that was supposedly thriving, was drowning in nearly $500,000 of debt. Even the cars weren't real. All 3 were leased, with huge balloon payments coming due. We didn't own anything. We just had very expensive monthly obligations. I sat in my kitchen at 3 in the morning surrounded by printouts and did the math. Total debt. Approximately $1,900,000. Total real asset value. Maybe $1,600,000. We were in the red by $300,000, maybe more. But where had all the money gone? I kept digging. Over the next few weeks, I tracked every transaction I could find, and the picture that emerged was devastating. Gambling losses of $180,000. Crypto investments that vanished $75,000. An apartment I knew nothing about, rented for a woman I didn't know. $60,000 in rent and expenses. A lifestyle that never made it home. Watches, suits, trips I was never invited on, another $85,000. My husband wasn't building an empire. He was building a house of cards with borrowed cards that were also on fire. We looked wealthy, the same way a mannequin looks alive. Convincing from a distance, completely empty up close. My first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to cry, to demand answers. But I knew Bradley. I had watched him operate for years. If I confronted him, he'd gaslight me, explain it away, and make me feel crazy for questioning him. He'd probably find a way to blame me for it. Worse, if he knew I knew, he might try to get his hands on my money too. See, I had always kept something of my own. My grandmother's voice in my head. A woman should have her own money. My 401k from my years at the law firm. I had rolled it over when I quit, but I never touched it. By then, it had grown to about $180,000. That was mine. Earned at my job. Separate property under the law. And then there was my grandmother herself. She passed away when I was 28 and left me $340,000. Her will was specific. This money is for Monica only. I kept it in a separate account for 6 years, never commingling it with Bradley's finances, never using it for household expenses. My grandmother kept her own account for 50 years. Not secret money, she always said. Just mine. Smartest woman I've ever known. I had roughly $520,000 that was entirely legally and separately mine. So I didn't confront Bradley. Instead, I protected myself. I worked with my uncle, a retired CPA, to set up an irrevocable trust for Owen. My 401k and my inheritance went into that trust. My name was not on it as a beneficiary. Bradley's name was certainly not on it. It was for Owen's future. College, first home, emergencies. And it was untouchable. Then I documented everything. Every mortgage document, every hidden account, every suspicious transaction. I printed copies and kept them at my sister's house. I kept copies in a safe deposit box. I saved everything on an encrypted drive. And then I waited. I knew Bradley would eventually leave. Men like him always do. They get bored or find someone younger, or decide they deserve more. I just had to be ready when it happened. 3 years of waiting, 3 years of watching him dig the hole deeper. 3 years of smiling at dinner parties knowing our entire life was built on quicksand. I got very good at pretending I didn't know my husband was financially drowning us both. When Bradley finally asked for the divorce, when he demanded the house, the cars, the business, everything, I almost laughed out loud. He wasn't asking for assets. He was demanding debt. He just didn't know it yet. Back to the present, I sat across from Talia Russo and placed 3 binders on her desk. 3 years of evidence, every mortgage document, every loan statement, every hidden account. She read in silence for nearly an hour. When she finally looked up, her expression had completely transformed. You've known this for 3 years? I was waiting for him to leave. I knew he would eventually. And when he demanded everything, he demanded all the debt. He just doesn't understand that yet. Talia leaned back in her chair. The pity was gone from her eyes. The concern was gone. What replaced it was something like awe. So when you sign over the assets, you walk away clean. He gets the mortgages, the business debts, the lease obligations. All of it becomes his sole responsibility. And my inheritance, my retirement account? Separate property. Never commingled. Legally protected. Sitting safely in a trust for my son. Talia was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. Mrs. Keene, she said, I believe I owe you an apology. I thought you had given up. I smiled back. Everyone thinks that. That's the point. Talia went from looking at me like a lost kitten to looking at me like a chess grandmaster. The trap was already built, the numbers were verified, the documentation was airtight. All I had to do now was let Bradley think he was winning. And nobody does graceful loser better than a woman who's had 15 years of practice. The next 3 months were a masterclass in acting. I became exactly who everyone expected me to be. Broken, defeated, barely holding on. I showed up to mediation sessions with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. I spoke in a quiet, hesitant voice, like a woman who had lost all her confidence. I asked for so little that even the mediator seemed uncomfortable. I just want enough to start over, I said during our second mediation. I'm not trying to be difficult. I know the business is his life's work. I know the house means everything to him. I don't want to destroy our family any more than it already is. I requested a $50,000 cash settlement, my personal belongings, and shared custody of Owen. That was it. Bradley agreed immediately. He was probably expecting me to fight for half of everything. That's what any reasonable lawyer would demand. Instead, I was asking for crumbs. He looked at me across the mediation table with something resembling pity, like I was a wounded animal he was gently putting out of its misery. I deserved an Oscar for that performance, or at least a Golden Globe. I was playing the role of a lifetime, and my only audience was my lying, cheating, and soon-to-be bankrupt ex-husband. With each passing week, Bradley's arrogance grew. He stopped being careful. He stopped pretending to be the reasonable one. He started telling anyone who would listen that I hadn't even put up a fight. She just gave up, he told his golf buddies. I offered her a fair deal, and she took it without a word. Phyllis was even worse. She bragged at her book club, her church group, and every social gathering she attended. Bradley is keeping everything. That woman didn't get a dime. I always knew she wasn't strong enough for my son. To celebrate his upcoming victory, Bradley bought himself a new $15,000 watch. I know because I saw the charge on the business account. He was still using company money for personal expenses, still digging that hole deeper. He wore it to our next mediation session, making sure I noticed. He also took Kendra to dinner at the Regent Room, the fancy restaurant where we celebrated our 10th anniversary. He posted pictures on social media. Life is good when you're with the right person, he wrote. The right person. He meant the person who didn't know about his mountain of debt yet. Meanwhile, Kendra had started redecorating my house. New furniture in the living room, new art on the walls. She even painted my kitchen gray. She painted it gray. I spent 3 weeks choosing that sage green, 3 weeks of paint samples and lighting tests and driving myself crazy to get the perfect shade. And she painted over it with contractor-grade gray paint, like it was nothing. Gray. Like her personality, like her future with Bradley once she found out he was broke. Very fitting, really. Marissa kept calling, fishing for information under the guise of friendship. I played along perfectly. How are you holding up? She would ask, her voice laden with fake concern. I just want this to be over. I'd tell her, making my voice crack slightly. I can't fight anymore. I don't have the energy. Within hours, Bradley would know. I could practically see him relaxing, letting his guard down even further. Marissa thought she was playing me. In reality, she was just offering a courier service, and not a very expensive one at that. But while the adults were playing their games, Owen was watching. And my son, my smart, observant, wonderful son, was starting to notice things that didn't add up. He noticed his dad's new $15,000 watch, but he heard Bradley say they couldn't afford the school trip to Washington, D.C. He noticed Kendra's shopping bags piling up in the foyer, but he heard Bradley complain that money was tight. He noticed the disconnect between the lifestyle his father projected and the excuses he kept making. One night, Owen came over to my little apartment and sat at my second-hand kitchen table. He looked at me with those serious eyes, so much like his father's but with something Bradley had lost long ago. Honesty. Mom, he said quietly, is Dad really rich? I looked at my son for a long moment. What do you think? He was silent, processing. I think something's not right. I think he's pretending. I leaned across the table and squeezed his hand. Trust your gut. Just wait a little longer. My 15-year-old figured out something was wrong before 2 lawyers and a CPA did. I should bill his college fund for consulting fees. Behind the scenes, Talia was preparing our legal strategy with surgical precision. The main divorce agreement clearly stated I was waiving all rights to marital property. The house, the business, the vehicles, all would go to Bradley. In exchange, I would receive my modest cash payout and walk away. But attached to that agreement was an addendum, a detailed liability disclosure statement. Every debt, every mortgage, every loan, every obligation tied to those assets. When Bradley signed for all the assets, he would legally assume all the liabilities. The mortgages would become his sole responsibility. The business debts would transfer entirely to him. The vehicle lease obligations would be his problem alone. It was all there in black and white. Legal, proper, and devastating. Legal documents are like poetry, Talia told me. Boring, expensive poetry that can ruin someone's life. My favorite kind. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Gregory Stanton, Bradley's lawyer, called Talia with concerns. My client is taking on significant assets, Gregory said cautiously. I would like to request a full financial audit before we finalize, just to verify everything. Talia kept her voice neutral. Of course, we'll provide whatever documentation you need. But when Gregory brought this up to Bradley, my soon-to-be ex-husband shut him down immediately. No audits, Bradley told him. I built that company. I know exactly what it's worth. I'm not paying some accountant to tell me what I already know. I strongly advise we verify the asset values before you sign, Gregory countered. This is a significant number. Bradley cut him off. Kendra wants this done. I want this done. No more delays. Gregory had been practicing law for over 30 years. He knew when a client was about to make a mistake. He also knew he couldn't force someone to take his advice. He presented Bradley with a waiver, a document acknowledging that Gregory had recommended an independent financial review, and that Bradley was refusing to do so against his counsel's advice. Bradley signed it without reading it, just like he would sign everything else without reading it. Never underestimate the power of an impatient girlfriend to make a man skip the fine print. Kendra was worth millions in legal strategy to me anyway. The night before the hearing, Bradley sent me a text. Thanks for not making this ugly. I stared at that message for a long time. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of building his business, raising his son, managing his life. And he was thanking me for not making it hard on him as he threw me away. I texted back. I just want what's best for Owen. And what was best for Owen? His trust fund, his future secured, and a father who was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Talia called me that night. Thursday, 9 in the morning, final hearing. Judge Franklin, are you ready? I looked around my small apartment, the second-hand furniture. The boxes still unpacked in the corner. The tiny kitchen I painted sage green because it reminded me of hope. I had been ready for 3 years. 3 years of waiting, and it was finally here. I felt like a kid on Christmas morning. If Christmas morning involved divorce and financial vengeance. Thursday morning, 9 in the morning. Bradley would walk into that courtroom expecting to collect his prize. He had no idea he was about to inherit a financial avalanche he had signed for himself. And the best part? He had asked for it in writing with witnesses. Thursday, April 17th, 9 in the morning. Courtroom 4B. I remember every detail of that morning. The way the sunlight streamed through the tall windows, the smell of old wood and floor polish, the quiet rustle of lawyers shuffling papers. 15 years of marriage would officially end here, and 3 years of patience would finally pay off. Bradley arrived first, of course. He was wearing his best suit, the charcoal Armani I had helped him pick out for a client dinner 3 years ago. His new watch caught the light as he shook Gregory's hand. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man about to close a very favorable deal. Kendra was waiting in the hall. She wasn't allowed in the courtroom, but she wanted to be there for moral support. I caught a glimpse of her through the door. Perfect makeup. Designer handbag. Scrolling on her phone like this was just another boring appointment. Phyllis was there too, sitting in the gallery. She was dressed up for the occasion, probably planning to take Bradley out for a celebratory lunch afterward. She glanced at me when I walked in and gave me a small, pitying smile. The kind you give someone you've already beaten. I arrived a few minutes after Bradley, wearing a simple navy dress, no jewelry, my hair pulled back in a low bun. I looked tired, defeated, like a woman with nothing left to fight for. Perfect. I looked like someone who had given up on life and fashion at the same time. Very convincing. I really should teach an acting class. Judge Franklin came in and everyone rose. She was in her 60s with silver hair, reading glasses perched on her nose, and 30 years on the family court bench. She had seen every trick, every manipulation, every lie divorcing couples could throw at each other. She reviewed the file briefly, then looked up. Keene versus Keene. Final dissolution hearing. I understand the parties have reached a settlement. Gregory stood first. Yes, Your Honor. My client Bradley Keene will be assuming all marital assets, including the family residence, the real estate development business, and all associated vehicles. In return, Mrs. Keene is to receive a cash settlement of $50,000. Talia rose beside me. That is correct, Your Honor. My client agrees to waive all claims to these assets and accepts the terms of the proposed settlement. Judge Franklin's eyes moved to me. She studied my face for a moment, looking for signs of coercion, I suppose signs that I was being pressured into a bad deal. Mrs. Keene, she said, I need to confirm that you understand what you are agreeing to today. You are waiving your right to substantial property, to the family home, to the business you helped build. Are you sure this is what you want? I kept my voice soft, slightly shaky. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And you are entering into this agreement willingly? No one is pressuring you. No, Your Honor. I looked down at my hands, then back up at her. I just want my husband to have everything he asked for. I want this to be over. The judge studied me for another long moment. I could practically see her internal debate, whether to push further, whether to order a continuance, whether to protect me from what looked like a terrible decision. But I was represented by counsel. I was answering clearly. I was a grown woman making her own choice. Very well, she said finally. Let's proceed. The clerk distributed the final documents, page after page of legal language, signatures required on every third page. Bradley signed eagerly, barely glancing at what he was agreeing to. He wanted this done. He wanted to get back to his new life with his new girlfriend and his new freedom. I signed slowly, deliberately. Every stroke of my pen was careful and precise. This was the moment I had been waiting for 3 years. I was going to savor it. Across the courtroom, I saw Bradley look over at Phyllis and smile. She nodded her approval. In the hallway, his phone vibrated, probably Kendra, sending encouraging texts. He checked his phone in court. During his own divorce hearing. That was the kind of man he was. Meanwhile, Gregory Stanton was doing what good lawyers do, reviewing the entire packet of documents one last time. Main agreement signed. Asset schedule signed. Settlement terms signed. Then he got to the addendum, the liability disclosure statement. I watched his face as he read. I watched confusion flicker across his features. I watched him flip a page back, then forward again, as if hoping he had misread something. He hadn't. Gregory's face went pale. He leaned toward Bradley, trying to be discreet. Bradley, he whispered. We need to talk. Bradley waved him off, still basking in his victory. Not now, we're almost done. Gregory's voice was more urgent. You're assuming all the debt. Bradley turned to look at him. What? The liability statement, Gregory whispered, papers rustling as he pointed. The mortgages, the business liens. It's all here. You're assuming personal responsibility for everything. For the first time, Bradley actually looked at what he had signed. I watched as his eyes scanned the numbers. I watched the color drain from his face. House. $1,100,000 owed. Market value. $850,000. Business. $480,000 in combined debts. Vehicles. $115,000 in lease obligations. Additional personal liabilities. $200,000. Total debt. Approximately $1,900,000. Net worth of everything he just claimed. Negative $300,000. He hadn't won the lottery. He'd won the bill for it. Bradley shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. This isn't right. He looked at me, then at the judge, then back at the papers. She hid this from me. This is fraud. Judge Franklin's voice was sharp. Mr. Keene, sit down. These numbers are fake, Bradley insisted, his voice rising. She manipulated the documents. Mr. Keene. The judge's tone left no room for argument. Sit down. He sat, but his hands were trembling. His confident smirk was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like panic. Judge Franklin looked at the documents before her, then at Bradley. Mr. Keene, I am looking at the attached liability disclosure statement. This agreement outlines the debts associated with the assets you are claiming. Assets in your name, your business, your property. She stared at him hard. Are you telling this court you are unaware of your own financial situation? Silence. Watching Bradley try to explain why he knew nothing about his own debts was like watching a cat explain why there's a broken vase on the floor. Fascinating and completely unconvincing. Gregory cleared his throat. Your Honor, I must note that I advised my client to conduct an independent financial review prior to this hearing. He declined. I have documentation. He held up the waiver, the one Bradley had signed without reading, the one that stated in clear legal language that Gregory had recommended a full audit and Bradley had refused. Judge Franklin reviewed it briefly. So, Mr. Keene, you were advised to verify these figures. You chose not to. You signed a waiver acknowledging that choice. She looked at Bradley. Is that correct? Bradley stared at the waiver like it was a snake that had just bitten him. I didn't, I thought. Is that your signature, Mr. Keene? A long pause. Yes. Then you willingly assumed this risk. You had the opportunity to investigate. You chose not to. The settlement stands. Bradley turned to me, desperation breaking through his composure. You knew, his voice cracked. You knew all of this? I looked him calmly in the eye. I was your bookkeeper for 11 years, Bradley. I knew everything. His face cycled through emotions faster than I could count. Confusion, rage, betrayal, fear, and finally, the one I had been waiting for, realization. The understanding that he had done this to himself. I want to withdraw the agreement, Bradley said, turning to the judge. I didn't understand what I was signing. This isn't fair. Judge Franklin shook her head. Mr. Keene, you signed documents before this court, stating you understood and agreed to all terms. You were represented by competent counsel. You refused further review. Your wife did not hide anything. These are your debts, your mortgages, your obligations. She paused. The settlement is final. The gavel came down. Mrs. Keene, you have your settlement. Mr. Keene, you have your assets as agreed, along with all associated liabilities. This marriage is dissolved. I stood, smoothed my dress, and picked up my purse. Then I looked at Bradley one last time. He was slumped in his chair, papers scattered in front of him, his entire world collapsing around him. You said you wanted everything except Owen, I said quietly. I gave you exactly what you asked for. I walked out of that courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, I could hear Bradley's voice rising, yelling at Gregory, demanding to know how this happened, threatening lawsuits. Gregory's calm replies drifted out. I told you to do an audit. I have it in writing. You refused. Through the glass doors, I saw Kendra's face change as she listened. I saw her look at Bradley, really look at him, and see something other than the successful businessman she thought she was getting. She was gone before I reached the elevator, moving fast, heels clicking on the marble floor, not looking back. Kendra's exit was faster than her entrance into my marriage. At least she was consistent. I stepped out into the April sunshine. The sky was blue, the air was warm. Somewhere behind me, my ex-husband was yelling at his lawyer about fairness and fraud and how none of this was his fault. Ahead of me was a new life, smaller than my old one, simpler but entirely my own. The collapse happened faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, Kendra moved out of the house, packing her things in the middle of the night and leaving a note that said, "This isn't what I signed up for." The gray kitchen was empty. Within a month, Bradley tried to sell the house. But when you owe more than something is worth, you don't have buyers. You just have banks calling about late payments and real estate agents suggesting short sales. Within 2 months, the business started to default. Vendors filed lawsuits. The line of credit was frozen. The company Bradley had spent 15 years building, the company I had propped up for 11 of those years, was falling apart. Within 3 months, Bradley was meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. The man who once bragged about his empire was now calculating which assets he could protect from creditors. The answer was almost none. Phyllis's perfect son was calling family members for loans, showing up at relatives' houses with excuses and explanations. I didn't know about the debt. Monica must have hidden it somehow. I was tricked. But the documents told a different story. The mortgages were in his name, the loans were in his name, the gambling debts, the crypto losses, the secret apartment, all his choices, all his signatures. I heard that Phyllis's Christmas newsletter that year was very short. Bradley is exploring new opportunities. Yes, opportunities in debt restructuring. The side conflicts resolved with a kind of poetic symmetry. Marissa called me about a week after the hearing. Her voice was trembling. I had no idea things were that bad. I'm so sorry, Monica. I never wanted this. I thought Bradley and I didn't answer. Not answering gave her none of the closure she was looking for. Some bridges aren't meant to be repaired. Some friendships don't deserve a second chance. 20 years of history, betrayed for a wink and empty promises from a man who used everyone around him. She tried calling 3 more times, then stopped. I imagine she's still waiting for Bradley to notice her. She'll be waiting a long time. Phyllis tried a different approach, going through Owen. Tell your mother I didn't know about the money problems. Tell her I'm sorry for how I treated her. Tell her I want to talk. Owen looked at his grandmother, the woman who had packed his mother's belongings in trash bags, who had called his mother useless, who had sided with his father without asking a single question, and said, "Mom's busy building her life. She doesn't have time for excuses." Phyllis wanted forgiveness. I wanted peace. Guess which one of us got what we wanted? Owen, my wonderful, smart, observant son, finally understood everything. Not because I explained it, but because he figured it out himself. He saw the court documents, he heard his father's excuses, he watched Kendra leave, watched Phyllis scramble, watched the whole facade crumble. One night, about a month after the divorce, he sat with me in my little apartment, the one with the sage green kitchen, the one with the second-hand furniture and the finally unpacked boxes. "You waited 3 years," he said quietly. "You knew the whole time and you just waited. I wanted to make sure you were protected," I told him. "Whatever happened between your father and me, I needed to know you would be okay. The trust fund, $520,000, safe and untouchable." He was quiet for a moment, then he hugged me. Really hugged me. The kind of hug I hadn't gotten from my 15-year-old son in months. The kind that said, "I get it." The kind that said, "I'm proud of you." 15-year-old boys don't often hug their mothers willingly. I knew I had done something right. My $50,000 settlement went to setting myself up. First month's rent, security deposit, basic furniture that didn't fall apart. It wasn't luxury, but it was stability. The trust fund stayed exactly where it was, Owen's future, college, maybe his first home one day. A safety net no one could ever take from him. And I enrolled in interior design courses at the community college. The dream I put on hold when I was 23 to help Bradley build his empire, I was finally building my own. I started small. My first real client was a woman named Chloe, 52, just out of a 28-year marriage. She was standing in her new empty apartment looking lost when she asked me, "How do you even start over?" I thought about it for a moment. One room at a time, one color at a time, one day at a time. We painted her kitchen sage green. She cried when she saw it. "Happy tears," she said. "The color of new beginnings." About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Bradley showed up at my apartment. I barely recognized him. He had lost weight, but not the healthy kind. He had dark circles under his eyes, his suit was wrinkled, and the watch was gone. He looked like a man who had been through a war and lost. He stood at my door, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I didn't know it was that bad," he said. His voice was raw. "I made mistakes. I know that now. But I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I leaned against my doorframe and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man I had loved for almost half my life. This man who had thrown me away like trash. This man who was now drowning in the consequences of his own choices. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Maybe we can work something out." I don't know. Maybe we could. He couldn't even finish the sentence. Couldn't bring himself to ask for what he really wanted. "Help, my help." "You asked for everything except Owen," I said calmly. "You got exactly what you wanted. Monica, please." "Goodbye, Bradley." I closed the door. He stood in the hallway for 10 minutes. I know because I watched through the peephole while eating ice cream. Best show I've ever seen. 5 stars, would watch again. That night, after Owen had gone to bed, I sat in my small living room and looked at the picture of my grandmother on the shelf. The recipe box was next to it. The one thing Phyllis had almost taken, the thing that mattered most. "You were right about everything, Grandma," I said softly. "Keep your own money. Know your worth. And never let anyone make you feel small." The apartment was quiet, small. Nothing like the house I lived in for 15 years, but it was mine. Every paint color, every piece of furniture, every decision mine. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was free. Comment. I think what resonates most is that true strength doesn't always need to be loud. It's about quietly knowing your own worth, even when the world around you tries to tell you otherwise. Setting boundaries isn't about punishing others. It's about protecting your peace. We are all responsible for the choices we make and the life we build from them. True victory isn't about winning an argument, but about having the freedom to heal and start anew. That healing process always starts with being kind to yourself. Sometimes the smartest choice is to walk away from the noise and choose tranquility. I hope this reminds you that you have the power to write your next chapter on your own terms. Always remember to build a life where you feel safe and respected, starting from within. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.